Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Zimmerman-Jin, and I am part of the Skoll Foundation team. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Skoll World Forum session, Women Leaders for Climate Justice, Shaping Solutions. This year, the forum's theme is Closing the Distance. We thought there was no better way to reflect that theme than to invite our global network to design and build a new kind of event together with us. I want to share a few quick logistical items before we begin. First, this session is being recorded and will be released publicly after the event. Please feel free to use the chat to engage with each other and ask questions of the speakers. This session is scheduled to end in 1 hour, and after the session, please take a few seconds to complete the single question survey in the poll tab to the right of the video screen. On social media, we're using the hashtag SkollWF and would love for you to do the same. We're thrilled to be able to include this session in our virtual Skoll World Forum, and I want to extend a special thank you to Pat Mitchell for proposing, designing, and moderating the session. Pat Mitchell, among many accomplishments, is the editorial director of TED Women, the chair of the Sundance Institute board, and we're lucky to count her as a member of the board for Participant and the Skoll Foundation. With that, I'd like to introduce Pat Mitchell to kick off this incredible panel of powerhouse women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, and welcome everyone to the first of many conversations at the Skoll World Forum about the climate crisis, the crisis which truly is an urgent threat to life as we know it on this planet. There are many approaches to discussing this crisis, just as there are many pathways to solutions. This particular session will focus on a fundamental truth about the climate crisis, and that is that it is felt and its impact is adversely experienced and disproportionately experienced by the communities that are most often the least responsible for the crisis. You will hear today the many ways in which we define climate injustice, racial injustice, gender injustice, generational injustice, geographical and developmental injustice. And each of the women leaders who have joined us today come at this work through a particular framework and commitment. So please join me in welcoming Mary Robinson. Mary, as the former president of Ireland, began this work early and has been in the work and on the front lines throughout her career. She was a UN climate envoy. She's currently chair of the elders. And in our conversation today, we'll share many of the initiatives that she continues to launch as an effort to bring all of the power of women's leadership to the issue of finding the right solutions that lead us to climate justice. She wrote a book called Climate Justice. And Mary, may we begin with you and your definition of climate justice and where we are in the process towards finding the solutions.
Well, I discovered, Pat, that there are actually many layers within what we call climate justice because it springs from the injustice. And you've actually touched on them, so I'll be very brief. The first is that, as you said, it disproportionately and much earlier climate change affects the poorest countries, the poorest communities, small island states, indigenous peoples. They have an existential experience that the richer parts of the world are only beginning to now find. Within that, there's the gender dimension, that women have different social roles, often have different power, even different rights sometimes, still have to put food on the table, and are very resilient with their communities. Thirdly, the intergenerational injustice, which Shea, whom we'll be speaking with, and many other climate activists, young people have been telling us about, calling us out for not providing them with the security of having a safe future for their children and grandchildren. And then there's the subtle pathways to development of different parts of the world. The United States, Europe, Japan, Korea, we built our economies on fossil fuel. We need to be grateful to the workers in coal and oil and gas who helped us to build our economies. But now we have to wean ourselves off as quickly as we can with just transition for them and their communities. But what about developing countries? They're finding oil and gas and coal, and they want to go green, but they're not getting the technology. And it does, it's expensive to go green. You've got to have the technology, the training, the skills. And we haven't shown enough solidarity to let them go as green as they would like to. And then the fifth injustice is the injustice to nature herself. And that's the loss of biodiversity, which is so serious, the extinction of species. And it's women's leadership, in my experience, and I can give you some practical examples later in our discussion of how we have made a difference. And it's because we take a people-centered justice approach. This is a human-centered problem, not a technical scientific one, although it's that as well. But unless we focus on the injustice, we're not going to bring about moving forward with equality, with justice, and with sustainability.
Thank you, Mary, for that framework. And certainly our next woman leader joining us speaks from two perspectives, that of an indigenous woman and also that of that generational injustice you referred to. Batista is one of the world's most honored and respected global climate leaders. In her organization, Fridays for the Future, she has been on the front lines making a difference, speaking out for and demanding the changes necessary for a safe and secure future for her generation. Shie, thank you for joining us and thank you for the work. Where are we now in terms of the generational injustice and the efforts that have been made by a global outcry from your generation that changes must come, solutions just and sustainable must be found?
Well, thank you for that question, Pat. And, first of all, thank you to everyone here for holding this space for us in this very important conversation of climate justice. And, as Pat mentioned, for the past 2 years, I've been working in the youth climate movement, organizing protests with Fridays for Future, including our September 2019 mobilization, which brought more than 7.4 million people to the streets to demand climate justice. And as Pat mentioned, I'm also a representative of my indigenous community, which is the Otomi Toltec community in central Mexico. And what I can tell you about that interconnection is that so often we talk about moving forward. We talk about the next big technology. We talk about the next big thing that we're going to make. And the truth is that we actually have to go back to our roots, go back to where we come from as humans, where we come from with that connection with Mother Earth. Because if we don't have that foundation right, if we don't have that reciprocity and love for Mother Earth, we can't really move forward with solutions that are disconnected from what we're supposed to be connected to. And another layer of that interconnection is that, in indigenous communities, there's youth and elder circles where youth learn from the wisdom of elders, and elders are, propelled to do their work with the energy and revitalization that youth bring to movements. And that's what I want to see in the climate justice movement, that cycle of intergenerational cooperation where youth learn from adults, but we also bring in that aspect of urgency, which is what the climate movement has been needing for the past 50 years. That aspect of we actually cannot wait any longer. We had 10 years to have our carbon emissions. Now that's down to 7, right? And some people keep talking about 10 years, and we just have to realize that we cannot move forward unless all stakeholders are present at the table. And a lot of youth like myself have not been invited to those tables, which is why we have been building our own. But now that we have that, web of interconnectedness worldwide of youth leaders, we are now demanding that we are actually invited to decision-making tables so that our perspective and the element of urgency is brought into climate solutions. Because we cannot talk about net zero by 2050 when what we need is 0 by 2030. So I look forward to our discussion today. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm really looking forward to what everyone has to say.
Shie, each time you or any other youth activist from your generation speaks, I'm reminded of that beautiful indigenous saying that we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children and our grandchildren. Thank you for all the activism and for the strong and important voice that you bring to this and to many other conversations. Jira Mary, you live in a country and on a continent where there is abundant evidence of the importance of natural resources. And you, through the work of the Green Belt movement and now as the regional director for Africa in the World Resources Institute, you are witnessing what is happening, to the injustice that Mary referred to, that we see evidenced in nature and in the natural balance. What can you share with us of witnessing this decline in natural resources, this exploitation of natural resources, as we try to find a pathway to a climate justice solution?
Thank you so much, Pat. It's lovely to be in this panel with everybody. Nature and justice, as has been mentioned, have been inextricably linked forever. This is not something new. This is something that women and young people for generations have always understood and even practiced and taught. So it's one of those things that I think, as you said, young people, especially now, have begun to put a face to what climate injustice looks like. And their anger and their sense of urgency has just changed our tenor and has made us stand and listen. What we know is that the natural environment delivers massive benefits. There is no discussion about that. Everybody knows that nature has significant benefits to offer society. But what we also know is that the injustice in that is often that people across the world, the most disadvantaged in society, around the world, have often been people of color, often people in the lowest paid jobs, living in cheap housing, and often even in informal settlements. They're the ones who tend to be in places where nature is at its worst state and stages, living next to hazardous waste and living in places which are pretty much devastated by nature. So we know that that has been a practice. And for us, certainly in Africa, the injustice is often there, that we invest so heavily, but not in places and not for those who need it most. And I think one of the issues that we have to get much better at is communicating at a policy level, communicating why the natural environment is so important. Believe it or not, that is often where we go wrong. The local communities understand our national policy hasn't caught up to it. So we plow through natural infrastructure to put in cement and roads, and plow through parks to put in roads, not appreciating the urgent importance of this natural infrastructure. So we have a lot of work to do communicating it and being just about the access to green spaces.
And one of the ways, Jira, that your work has made that point so eloquently and so simply, actually, is the planting of trees in your native Kenya, just to see the transformation that happens within an inner city park when millions of trees are brought back into the environment. But as you suggest, in many places, we have lost that connection between the natural environment and what it means to the integrated health and well-being and balance of all our lives. So I want to come back and visit the many lessons that you bring forward to us today. Gloria Walton, you're leading a relatively new organization, which boldly calls itself the Solutions Project. And certainly when it comes to finding the solutions to climate injustice, we are looking to you and to organizations like the Solution Project for innovative and innovative, entrepreneurial new ways of looking at climate injustice and finding the more just and sustainable solutions. What, in your opinion, now as the leader of this organization, are still our biggest barriers?
Thanks so much, Pat. It's an honor and a deep privilege to be here with you again and amongst such good and inspiring company and such great women. It's great to see us in leadership roles and positions. And as a Black woman, that brings me joy. It brings my heart joy. And also as a Black woman in the US, my heart is also aching today. And here we are, 9 years after the death of Trayvon Martin, and as the George Floyd trial is going on. This past Sunday in Minnesota, as a lot of us have heard, the 20-year-old Black father, Dante Wright, was shot and killed by a police officer. And Black people are repeatedly murdered and killed quickly by the hands of police officers who swore to protect and serve our communities. And on top of that, we're being killed slowly by the decisions that have been made to create a conflation of problems and poor conditions that our communities are living with every single day. And we're here today talking about the disproportionate impact of Black people, indigenous communities, immigrant communities, Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, and other people of color in the US and across the globe, as Jira mentioned. And BIPOC communities are feeling the brunt of these systemic injustices viscerally. And this is why environmental justice communities are demanding systemic transformation of all the systems that are causing harm and literally killing us. And yes, this is about racism. And I say this because people often are like, well, what does racism have to do with it? But it's the very same communities that are disproportionately impacted by environmental degradation and state violence today that are the same red line communities of yesterday. And red line communities that were purposefully segregated, where decisions were made to create messed up conditions, decisions were made to disinvest and underinvest in these communities, and violence and harm was exercised against these communities. And this wasn't happenstance, and it wasn't coincidence. And so at the Solutions Project, at my organization, we're a national organization that resources the constellation of community power building institutions and alliances that are innovating intersectional climate solutions rooted in racial justice. And we do this both by direct grant making, primarily to organizations led by and serving Black, Indigenous, immigrant women and other people of color, because we know that that's who's at the front lines of poverty, racism, COVID, as they were talking about a lot in the plenary, and the climate crisis. And that's who's at the forefront of replicable models and transformative climate solutions. And we also resource these organizations through media because we believe that we must amplify our stories and shine a light on community-based and community-driven solutions that are often holistic. I want to say, Mary, you mentioned it's about making sure that we're people-centered and they're thinking about our natural resources. These solutions are often intersectional and addressing multiple issues and problems at once. And I hope to be able to share some of these solutions with you later on in the conversation.
Most definitely, Gloria. We want to hear more about the specifics of this work, but I also want to acknowledge and express gratitude to you for bringing forward this most tragic and recent example of the racial injustice that plagues our country as well as other places in the world. Yes. Thank you for reminding us that it is all intersectional. And sitting at an intersectional point in government must feel like a heavy weight sometime to our next participant, Gina McCarthy, as the U.S. climate envoy. You know these front lines, you've been on them, you know how all of these issues and injustices are interrelated and express themselves in the inequitable ways that impact every aspect of our lives and certainly impact our ability to resolve the inequities in the climate crisis? What is the role of government and the U.S. climate envoy in finding these just and sustainable solutions?
Well, first of all, let me join others in thanking you, Pat, for your incredible commitment and leadership, and to tell you how joyful I am to spend this kind of time with such strong women who all bring a slightly different way of looking at these challenges, but all of them have a voice that's very special and I think deserve to be heard. So thank you to Skoll for allowing this conversation to happen. And let me be very clear, Pat, I think the role of government is to lead. I think the role of government is to understand who they're governing and to work for those people, especially the communities that have been left behind. And so I am working in the government here to make sure that we're not just leading, but we're acting. We're taking cognizance of all of the tools that government has, and we're recognizing the intersectionality, Pat, that you mentioned, that climate is not a planetary problem, it is a people problem. And in order to solve it, you can't simply just look at how best you reduce greenhouse gas emissions without being cognizant that people need to have good jobs. People need to make a significant amount of money in order to live well, and they deserve that opportunity. And I'm not talking about just the people who have good jobs today. I'm talking about the people in the United States, nearly 10 million that have lost their jobs over the past year. And I'm talking about the need to actually confront equity, similar to what Gloria is mentioning. We can no longer run away from it. We've had a Black reckoning over the past year that let us realize that over the past 200 years, we have not reconciled ourselves to this issue. And now that our eyes are open, there is no way that we should be closing them again. And the wonderful sort of cognizance that President Biden put on the table when he was campaigning for presidency is why I'm here, because he recognized those intersectionalities. He said that we're going to create jobs and we're going to build a clean economy moving forward. And that is going to give people an opportunity to go back to work. It's going to give people to build a country that is more economically solid and sustainable. It's going to keep us safer and healthier if you look climate in the eye and you address it. And importantly, he said that equity was not just a consideration. It had to be the way in which we frame. At least 40% of the benefits should go directly to those communities that have been left behind. And so it's my job to make sure that these commitments are actually met. And it's my job to talk about them as being good for people, as being solutions for how we build our country in terms of its economic stability, but how we rejoin the international community in a way that is robust, in a way that is forward-leaning, in a way that President Biden has put in the table. So it's what you spend your money on is where you add your value, and he is going for it with bold steps to be taken and with a full-throated response that we grab this moment in time. Because God help us if we fall back into bad habits now, because the world can't tolerate it, the planet won't stand for it, and communities should never have to speak up and demand their human rights again in the United States of America or anywhere else.
Well, I don't know about everybody else, but I'm breathing a lot easier knowing that you're the person sitting in that office, Gina, with such a strong commitment to finding that these just and sustainable solutions. And I want to just come back to you on one point, and that is that often when we have these conversations, we realize that one of the biggest barriers that just appears again and again to the kind of urgent change and the new policies that we must have to reverse the damage is this feeling that the transition to renewables, the transition to a green economy benefits those who already have the privilege and the opportunity. So how are you addressing that in terms of the policy communications?
Well, first of all, President Biden is looking at putting a lot of investment on the table so that everybody can have a chance to get into the middle class. I mean, we have been shrinking and only the top echelon has benefited. And part of that strategy is to take away some of the tax incentives that have been so beneficial to just the top and just to those corporations that want to offshore businesses, to the detriment of our ability to have good governance in a strong country at home. And you mentioned the just transition. One of the great things I think about the way in which we started is that we put that challenge right out in the open. We actually have a task force whose sole responsibility it is to look into the shift to a clean economy and what communities and what workers will be left behind if we don't do something about it. So we are actually investing millions and in fact intend to invest billions of dollars to ensure that those communities are recognized, that economic opportunities go to those communities, and that every worker, even in their own hometown, has an ability to actually get a good paying job. And so unions are going to be a big part of this because President Biden is a big labor guy. He loves the idea that this is a sound economic strategy to once again grow our country and its sustainability. But we're not hiding the fact that a clean energy economy is ending up in a shift. We've seen it already, and communities cannot be left behind, nor should any worker.
Gloria, do you have a comment to something that Gina said?
Yeah, I'm really appreciating, Gina, and thank you for raising the Biden-Harris executive order, which is all about committing 40% of climate investments to benefit disadvantaged communities. And I'd be remiss not to mention that this step was actually inspired by our grantee partners in New York State, Uprose, Push Buffalo, and a coalition of 300 other organizations. And the coalition is called New York Renews. And they fought and won one of the strongest climate bills in the US. And that was the Climate Leadership and Communication, the Community Protection Act. And that committed New York's to 100% clean energy and to direct about 35 to 40% of the investments to environmental justice communities. So hats off to Biden and Harris for taking that initiative, and to your leadership as well, Gina. And one of the things that comes up for me is, the role of government is key to accelerating a clean energy transition, as you mentioned, and the leadership of government is key. And I think what's going to be an imperative for us to be successful and kind of learning from the past is really making sure that government is working in partnership with the social infrastructure of grassroots leaders and environmental justice organizations and communities across the country. And having a structural way, I believe GA mentioned, a structural way for communities and frontlines, tribal nations, workers to engage in decision-making and shaping and defining what benefits, for example, kind of this language that's used in the policy actually means. And on the ground, 40% people are grateful for it and believe that it's a strong starting point, but recognizing that it's not the goal. Because in a time where we're talking about equity, we know that equity really is about leveling the playing field, if you will. So something like 40% is kind of that starting point. But to really level the playing field, we know that it requires an overinvestment, if there is such a thing, in these places and spaces that have been historically underinvested. And I kind of want to push it further. I think about this conversation that I had with a comrade Vu, where it's, beyond leveling the playing field, people are actually calling for a new playing field to be created. And that's the opportunity we feel like climate folks.
Building on that, Gloria, part of the building the new playing field, and while it's not new, putting a new focus and emphasis on where women are on that playing field, where women leaders are on that playing field. And certainly this panel is an indication of the strong and powerful women's voices that are on the front lines. And to also remind us all that we can't discuss any just solution if it's only focused on the United States. And we recognize this is a global crisis, and we are approaching the solutions in that manner. And Mary, I'd like to come back to you on that point, because recently you have put forward two important ideas which have been a part of your work forever. One of them is the importance of women leading for solutions, bringing the collaborative power of women's leadership. And then secondly, you have brought together African and European women leaders from lots of different sectors, saying, in this, we can be united and find paths forward, actions together. Can you talk about this initiative and your hopes for the connections you're making among women leaders on climate?
Okay, Pat, this is a wonderful panel. I'm really happy with the conversation, and I actually want to build on what Gloria was saying there. When we realized that the climate discussions were far too technical, far too, talking about emissions reduction, scientific, nothing about people. It was in Copenhagen, which was a failure in 2009. The following year, we formed a network of women leaders on gender and climate. And they helped with a big constituency of women because they were women ministers and women heads of the UN agencies. So they had an inside track. They helped to get the gender action plan. But the other thing they did, which speaks to Gloria's point, is they made sure that we had the right voices, the frontline international voices at the table in these discussions. And I can tell you, I was a witness to it, what a difference it made when you had indigenous women there at the table speaking as delegates, when you had grassroots women, community women who'd built up their communities, spoke from the absolute experience, and the delegates who were mainly, technicians of countries fighting their corner were absolutely bowled over by this reality that was being spoken around the table by these women. And I loved it. It was great. Now, I've built on that with Ellen Johnson-Sirleaf, who was on for the plenary earlier. Ellen and myself were asked to be two honorary presidents of a new foundation, the Africa-Europe Foundation. Now, being honorary president, it's not great, not very practical. So we decided we'd make it practical, that we would have a women leaders network that would overview how this Africa-Europe Climate Foundation would work. And its first paper was about climate. So that helped. And we're working on that now. We've had 3 very good meetings. And Pat, you're our honorary listener. And I love the fact that you're taking the time to listen. These are very serious conversations now at a leadership level. We will still need, we have young voices. We have Vanessa, whom Shea will know, from Uganda, who actually spoke at our meeting yesterday. And I was delighted that she spoke about the issue of clean cooking, which is such a reality for so many women's lives. And we need that grounded reality at the international level as well as at any other level. But you then formed the Connected Women, which we both belong to, Pat. I also belong to Fearless Women, as you do, that is led by Hala Thomasdottir with the B team of business leaders. So it links across to a B team of powerful, mainly male leaders in the business world to ensure that we're pushing them in the right direction, if I could put it that way. I have a great faith in women's leadership in this century because I can see the difference it's making.
And I want to come back to some of those very real connections you just made, Mary, between all the other, again, aspects of the climate crisis, from food insecurity to global health to all the ways in which we're experiencing it. But Wanjira, it reminds me of what I've witnessed on the ground on the continent of Africa are just incredibly powerful women's voices on all of those areas of life and work that have not been heard at the international level in the way that they seem to be now. Women taking leadership in new positions. Share with us, if you will, where you see these barriers breaking down between the women leading conservation and wildlife causes, or the women leading for food security. There are all these many different aspects of the climate crisis. And at the World Resources Institute, you're seeing all of that come together. There must be hope there for just and sustainable solutions.
Absolutely, Pat. One of the things we are seeing quite clearly is a commitment to local leadership and listening to local leadership. Because at the end of the day, like Gloria said, the communities that she works with are invested in the prosperity of their communities more than the rest of us. We have to invest in them where they are. So I really think we're finally coming around to appreciating that we need to make real investments in local leadership. And I want to speak here about adaptation. Adaptation is really where this hits the road. How do we ensure that communities build the necessary resilience to overcome not only the climate crisis, but all manner of shocks that are part of the planetary boundaries that we are crashing through at the moment? And building that sort of resilience requires that we put in the hands of local leaders the wherewithal, financial and otherwise, to do what they need to do. And so it is a scar on our conscience and the conscience of those who are committing resources to adaptation in climate finance. But we have less than 20% of the entire global pot of climate finance going into adaptation. How on earth will communities prepare and prevent losses and damages that they will foresee, especially, as we said, for issues that they did not commit? So I think, Pat, one of the things that we need to commit to really seriously, and this is also the point that Gina made about investing in local leadership, because that is where the action will be. And those are the people, organizations like Gloria's leading, will lead the change at the local level. And that's where it happens. I really love this concept that climate change is about people, because we've always said that it really is about greed, selfishness, and apathy, that we do not crack through the real issues that matter. It is about people, but it's about cracking through greed, selfishness, and apathy.
And it's about occasionally reminding us that we share this planet, and what happens to one of us happens to all of us, as certainly this global pandemic has made clear. Shie, the pandemic impacted your climate actions because in many ways it made it unsafe for you and other generations of young people to go to the streets as you had been doing. How have you modified your actions now, but kept the voices of indigenous young women of this new generation, kept those voices forward as we're looking for solutions?
So as we all know, the pandemic did not allow us to keep striking in person, which was one of our main, not only points of coming together, and I think that everybody who participated in a climate strike felt that sense of community, because at the end of the day, climate striking is about knowing that you're not alone in fighting the climate crisis. It's about knowing that there's people who you can rely on, and knowing that each person represents a solution, an idea. And so it was really hard to move from that people power that you could feel on the streets, the echo in the buildings and the rumbling of the pavement, to being on Zoom calls literally all day. So, but we have learned a lot. We have learned about resiliency, about self-care, about regenerative activism, which I think is really important, because if we want our work to be sustained, we need to take care of ourselves. And once we take care of ourselves, we can take care of the world. So that's something that, we have taken to heart. But we have also found many other, I want to touch upon what Mary said about like a feminist approach to climate justice, because in my own education, I have found that moving online, I have been able to actually do a lot of my own research when it comes to climate solutions, rather than just learning about things in school, which is not enough when it comes to climate education, right? So, for example, in my international relations class, we were learning that basically, all of these frameworks of international relations, like realism, which say all countries want is money and power, and they're willing to go to war to get it. Mm-hmm. And if we approach, all of our actions with that framework, that's where we're going to end up, with war. But if we approach it with a feminist approach of caring, which is like half of the world has that framework and vision, then we can actually turn the world around, turn our actions around, turn how we approach climate justice and climate solutions around. And I'll just share this really quickly, but the first reading that I'm always given in any climate related class is The Tragedy of the Commons. And I'm sure you've all here read The Tragedy of the Commons, which basically says, if you give people the ability or the freedom to regulate their own environment, they won't be able to. They will self-destruct. And I think that approach is actually destructive, because we have to trust ourselves to take care of Mother Earth, and indigenous peoples are examples of that, taking care of Mother Earth for thousands of years. So I think that the way in which we're approaching climate solutions with a mentality that we will be self-destructive is actually harmful to our ability to trust ourselves and trust humanity. And so, that is one of the points that I want to bring up. How do we make sure that climate education is not Eurocentric? It's not only about Eurocentric ways of looking at the world, and also not masculine center when it comes to everything that we do in international relations. And just to echo one last thing that Gloria said about overinvestment, it's so important that the communities that have been underinvested receive support. And this is where things like the Climate Community Investment Act comes in, because the Climate and Community Protection Act passed, but now comes the investment part, which is the other side of how do we actually get communities to fund their own solutions. Because it's not only about noticing that we can't leave communities behind, but actually these communities want to be included. They just don't have the resources to push their own solutions forward. I know I touched upon a lot of things, but these are things that I've been thinking about with all of your magnificent points, and something that I wanted to share.
Such wisdom. Shie, thank you for sharing it. Gloria, your work is so proximate to the communities that Shie and all of us are talking about, and your messaging and your communications about finding these solutions, the investments that are needed, you have to make the arguments feel real and secure to so many different kinds of communities, that just solutions are, and finding solutions are good for everyone. How do you do that? What is the communication that makes everybody's problem and everyone's benefit from the solutions?
The reality, which we've all been talking about today, is that we each have a role to play, whether that's the social infrastructure of grassroots leadership and organizations across the country and across the globe, or whether that's the role of government in different countries, the role of media even in capturing our stories and innovating solutions that are shining a spotlight on solutions that are happening on the ground, whether that's industry leaders, right? We can't forget industry leaders and corporations that actually have the largest carbon footprint, needing to be held accountable. And I think about the role of government in setting regulation, for example, because it's great when we have these initiatives that are like the 40% that we're doing here in the US, but it's not good if it's also happening in conjunction with cap and trade policies and policies that still allow corporations to pollute, or policies that are still allowing us to not keep oil in the ground, right? And so if we're really trying to elevate and accelerate a just energy transition, then that requires keeping oil in the ground. It requires approving things that are all about renewable and the way forward, and not regressing ourselves. In philanthropy, that's the world that I'm in now. I come out of 16 years of community organizing experience in South Central LA. And so I come into philanthropy with that 16 years of community organizing experience and understanding what it means and what it takes to do the work on the ground, and what it costs financially to your health, your mental health, your physical health. And I come into philanthropy feeling accountable to that. And quite frankly, like I'm, being a new booty, excuse my being frank and street a little bit, but being a new booty in philanthropy, I feel really accountable to movement, but I'm not really clear who a philanthropy is accountable to. And so it's been a little bewildering. And I feel like we actually have a responsibility to do better and to do our part and to practice, yes, trust-based philanthropy, which is what we do at the Solutions Project, and taking it further to solidarity philanthropy, where we're really standing in partnership and recognizing the leadership and the brilliance that happens on the ground versus thinking we have it all figured out and expecting communities to kind of fit into our visions and our plans, but you trust communities to know what's best in their own respective neighborhoods. Because we know that Puerto Rico is not California. And even in California, Northern California is not Southern California. New York is not Florida. So I think about the respective communities across the country and across the globe and trusting people to know what's best. And so it's our responsibility to be in solidarity with that and to fund solutions. And, you know, in the plenary, someone was talking about the opportunity to fail, to fumble. And I think it was Stacey Abrams. And that's something that I want to uplift because I feel like we have a tendency of trusting experts like scientists, but we don't trust on the ground experts who have lived experiences. And so we will fund vehemently the science and give people so much money that they can fail for a whole year. And with community groups who are innovating transformative change, addressing multifold solutions. So often people aren't just thinking about putting up an affordable housing unit, they're thinking about putting a solar panel on that housing unit because air quality is bad in their community. They're thinking about who is going to be putting a solar panel on that housing unit so that they're actually employing someone from the community in a good unionized job. So this is the transformative change that's happening on the ground, yet we don't fund those experts and we don't fund those solutions at the same scale. And so people are working with $50,000 grants, $100,000 grants, and no room to fail and expect it to change the world in a year. And so transformative grant making means that we need to think longer term. We need to do general operating, multi-year, six-figure grants. And right now, multi-year is a trend that's going on where people are comfortable with at most 3-year investments, but we need to be making 5 and 10-year investments because we know that change doesn't happen overnight. And doing that will demonstrate that we trust the leadership, the vision, and the wisdom of communities on the ground.
Gloria, you are articulating principles that are seeding all kinds of conversations in this community that are listening and who are with us today, because this is a community who believes that trusted philanthropy, what a great concept, and philanthropy deeply rooted in transformative change and the patience to, or the urgency to deploy it. Those are the principles that brings the Skoll community together over and over again. And I think of you, Gina, who has the responsibility, is sitting in one of the places where it's been toughest to build trust and to mobilize will. We know there's funds there in philanthropic funds and also government and business. The money is there. How do you motivate the will? How do you build the trust in government as a player in the solutions for climate justice?
Well, I think that's the challenge that the U.S. is facing right now, because we've had 4 years of an administration prior to this one that didn't invest in science, that didn't invest in communities, that period didn't invest, as far as I can tell. And so, one of the reasons why I feel like the time is now is because, I've spent my whole life working in government. I've never seen an opportunity like the one we're facing right now in the United States. Going off of this pandemic, people just need hope again. They need to know that there is an opportunity for them again. And I've worked primarily my whole life at local and state governments. I am so with Gloria on this issue and others who are speaking to the need to have communities to find their own destiny and to look at opportunities for investment. And you'll see, as part of the investment package that President Biden put together, is this some really creative opportunities to basically call out the fact that many communities have been dissected by terrible projects like big railways or roadways that have cut communities apart. And this is the opportunity to fund answers to that, to reconnect those communities. There's even a significant amount of money to entice zoning changes that have always been used to redline communities, never to bring them together. So you'll see pieces of significant opportunities for investment where the communities themselves are the ones that actually define how they want their communities to grow. And I think it's an essential component. There is nothing that says it's a one-size-fits-all approach. It is all about looking at block grants that you can give to cities and they can use to define their strategies moving forward. I think everybody knows the federal government in the prior administration did nothing but dismantle climate efforts and our science capability. Well, now we're turning that entirely around and we're beginning to recognize, to trust communities, to invest in them, to listen to them, to provide the resources, and yes, to regulate. We are not going to sit around and pretend that we don't have a good tool to get people healthy again, and that tool can be used to express the real impacts of fossil fuels on our economy and on our people, and how we need to divest ourselves of the challenges and the health burdens that has imposed to communities across the United States. So I think this is a moment in time. I loved working at the local level better than anything because the people were great. They knew what they wanted and they chased you around till they got it. We need to do the same with every level of government. It needs to speak to the people and their needs the way they want them filled.
Well, Jira Mary, I feel like you want to come in on this conversation. Mary, you're pulled together the leaders, women leaders from all over the world in different sectors. What's your comment on Gina's optimism and hope that we will find the solutions at the community levels?
Actually, what I'm loving to hear is that there's a connection made between women at the international level and the local level. Am I muted?
Nope, we're hearing you.
Okay, and that's really important. You know, I agree that it's at local community level that the real change happens. And hello?
Yeah, Mary, we are hearing you. There's a problem at your end.
Yeah, and you know, that's what's really important. That's why our network of women leaders before the Paris Climate Agreement brought the voices of indigenous and grassroots and frontline women who could tell exactly how you cope with, as when Jira said, adaptation, how important it is to think about loss and damage when things get as bad as they can get and are getting in communities. So, you know, what I like about this conversation is what you're talking about in the United States in redeeming the bad practices during the Trump era is exactly where we need to go internationally. And that's really good. It's people-centered, it's women's leadership, it's linking women at all levels. It's mayors and cities linking together as they are doing globally. It's you know, all of the possibilities of making the change that comes from understanding. It's by making it people-centered and tackling it as an issue of justice that we will get there.
There are many questions in the chat box, and apologies for not being able to get to them, but many of them relate to this question that we are talking about now, which is connecting the community leaders and what they know and what they need to the international policies and changes that are necessary. So we only have 5 minutes left together, if you can believe it. Wanjira, please come in because I feel that through your work at the World Resources Institute and on the continent, you're seeing how this happens, how community leaders are impacting national and international policies.
Absolutely, Pat. And, you know, it's so wonderful listening to all these voices because it just restores your sense of hope and your sense that a better world is really possible. And I think we just have to fight the good fight. We have to stay the course, because it is part of ensuring that we leave resources in the hands of organizations at the grassroots that are doing this work. It's exactly as you saw, Pat, with the Greenbelt movement, women who are working at the very basic level, ensuring their food security, ensuring the security of the landscapes around them. And in many ways, the multiplicity of those women creates a better climate for everybody. So the additive nature of that action being part of the collective, that we are finding is true. But where we are finding a lot of effort is needed is in making real commitment to support them, making real the commitment to invest in them, both in technology, both in capacity to manage and produce the sorts of reports we want. So instead, a lot is shifting around. Instead of waiting for a good glossy report, is to find out what is needed. These people are doing good work. How do I invest in them so they can produce the sort of outcomes that I need, but we can invest in them? So our real investment, I believe, will be in what we are calling locally led work, locally led adaptation, and locally led investments.
Gloria, at the Solutions Project, you're seeing this in action, yes? Can you give us an example or two of how this is working? You're disrupting the whole system here and saying we can take community solutions and move them forward.
That's right. You know, I think about past economic transitions that were really driven by market forces and corporate forces, and were often short term, and left workers and communities behind. And Mary and all of us are kind of elevating the importance of doing better and being different, and knowing that the market-driven corporate forces way is not working, right? That had us commodifying our communities, real people being extractive, exploitative, abusive, right, to both people and our resources. And so that needs to change. One of the things that's top of mind for some of the solutions that can be scaled, I'm thinking about Reverend Leo Woodbury and New Alpha Community Development Corps, and they're one of our grantee partners in South Carolina, and they've created what's called a hydro panel. And in the Reverend's words, that's it essentially creates water from the heavens. And that's using sunlight and air to make safe, clean drinking water with these hydro panels. And so that's like one community-led solution that I want to lift up. I'm thinking about native renewables in Navajo Nation in Arizona, where approximately 15,000 families don't have access to electricity and other missing infrastructure. There's some parts that don't have access to running water. And at Native Renewables, what they're doing is empowering Native American families to achieve energy independence. So democratizing an energy transition, a just energy transition. And they're training a workforce to install and maintain these off-grid solar systems. So this is what I mean by these intersectional, transformational solutions that are addressing multiple problems at once. And they're localized, right? They're democratizing this just energy transition. And these are some of the pieces that are inspiring me.
If we had more time, and we will throughout the Skoll World Forum to talk more about this, but just what these women leaders represent today in terms of real practical solutions, and most importantly, the leadership that is necessary from the grassroots level to the voice of the youth and the indigenous nations, to the leadership that you've brought together, Mary, with the African European Women Leaders Initiative One, Jira, your work, and of course, Gina, we are wishing you and your important role in moving policy and government's role forward in the U.S. government and in its role around the world. I am deeply grateful for the hope with which I am leaving this conversation, because I deeply believe that women will be the ones on the front lines leading urgently and sustainably for just and equitable solutions to the climate crisis. Thank you to each and every one of you for your work. And thank you for joining us. And during the break that is following this panel, you might want to go to one of the welcome sessions and meet up with the many colleagues, all well-minded and just-minded colleagues who are part of the Skoll World Forum. Thank you for joining us for this conversation.